Welcome to the Deep Dive,
Emerald City Hockey's Seattle Kraken podcast.
Hey everybody, and welcome back to the Deep Dive, Emerald City Hockey's Seattle Kraken podcast. RJ, we are here on the eve of the start of the Kraken's third season. When we were talking about having to do this podcast the day before the season, it's, we're going to break down the roster, the final cuts, all that stuff. But it was just like, we want a game, We want to be able to talk about the team playing a real game again. It's been so long, but we're going to have to wait at least 24 hours, RJ, for that to happen, to watch them start the season, hopefully play spoiler to the Vegas Golden Knights banner-raising event that we're all going to have to sit through before the game tomorrow. That being said, it's still just great to really feel like it's back and that hockey is finally upon us again, RJ.
For sure. To be honest, I was kind of sick of how drawn out this preseason felt. It just felt too long.
Yes.
I can't wait for the games to start counting again, but only have to wait just a little bit more than a day.
Yep. And look, I think we settled on the best podcast option possible, considering we didn't have a regular season game to talk about. And that is, of course, a listener mailbag episode. So we've got tons and tons of fun questions to get into when we get to the deep dive segment of the podcast. But right now, we're still at the beginning, which means I got to start off by saying a huge thank you to our sponsor, Queen Anne Beer Hall, for sponsoring the podcast each and every week. It means so much to us to have them on board for another season, and just super excited to, work with them again, and hopefully next time I'm up there, get in there. My diet is back, RJ, post-surgery. I can have whatever I want when I go there. I can't wait.
There you go. Lots of options to choose from on the big menu for you there. We'll see how many things we can get you to try.
I know, lots of good stuff. And then also, just because it's a new season, I want to remind everybody that our Patreon is back over at patreon.com/Emerald City Hockey. We got tons and tons of great stuff. We did our first episode of the Red Glare podcast, which is our podcast where we talk about league-wide topics. We did that last Friday. I thought it went really, really well. But we just announced our full month schedule for everything that we're going to be doing over on the Patreon, including our very first extra stream, which will be your Armchair GM stream coming up this Wednesday. So you can talk about all the cuts that the Kraken made. We'll talk about those also here on the podcast, but go more in depth into that, what the overall rosters are looking like both here and at the AHL level. What kind of moves the Kraken might have available to them as the season goes on. All that great stuff that you talk about there. And then on this Thursday, on the 12th, the second game of the season, we will be doing our live commentary game over on Patreon, where if you are a Terror of the Deep tier patron, you get to watch the game with us, and we all just hang out in a chat, just like similar to the post-game lives. But it's while the Kraken game is going, and we all watch the game together, talk about it. RJ and I try to break stuff down and entertain everybody through intermissions. It's a lot harder than it sounds, let me tell you. But we always have a fantastic time. I really can't wait to get back to that one. And then on the 25th, I will have my prospect live chat, where I go on and we talk about how all the Kraken prospects are doing. So we'll talk about where everybody ended up, whether they're with the Coachella Valley Firebirds or they went back to their leagues in Europe or Major Junior. We'll talk about how everybody's doing. Usually I'll have video. I don't know for the first one if we'll have video. We might focus more so on where everybody ended up and how they're starting their seasons in those places. But I have been recording some video here and there too, so might take a look at some stuff and do some live scouting reports on that as well. So and then obviously Red Glare podcasts every week. So that's great stuff. So lots and lots of good stuff to look forward to on the Patreon for this month of October, including the fact that anybody can right now go and sign up for a free 7-day trial. And like I just said, there's lots of good stuff this week, especially. Might want to look into that 7-day trial where you can hop on. You'll get the Red Glare from last week. You can listen to this Wednesday. You could join RJ for his Armchair GM stream. And then on Thursday, you can join us for that live game commentary. I think this would be a great week for everybody to try that 7-day trial. And then, hey, if you like it, just stay a patron. You get to do it every month with us. It'd be awesome. There's the spiel, RJ. How was that?
Well done, Dylan. No, I well done. I would give you a little round of applause there. I think you got everything out there. Look, I think you explained why it's a good time to start that free trial right now, right? You get the Armchair GM chat. You can join us for the live commentary, which again is always such a fun time. I'm really looking forward to that. We were bouncing around a few different dates. We had polls out for the patrons, which date we wanted. And you know what? I'm glad that the earliest possible date won because it's just been too long. I miss
Yep.
everyone. I miss just sitting down for a game with the community and just hanging out and watching it.
Definitely. So looking forward to that. But now let's go ahead and start the prospect. Let's start the podcast proper. There we go. Too many p words there for me. Let's start the podcast proper with news and notes. RJ, you've been around through the roster cuts, through their practice today, that last practice before the regular season starts. What do you have for us?
So quite a bit, actually. The Kraken made their final roster cuts, and the opening night roster is pretty much taking shape. So the Kraken's final roster cuts, they cut 5 players, the last 5 players out of camp. They sent 2 players down, Riker Evans and Shane Wright. They did not require waivers at all. They just went down to the Coachella Valley Firebirds. They're going to start the season there. And then 3 players that were put on waivers and have since cleared waivers, thankfully. That is Chris Drieger, Cale Fleury, and John Hayden. So the roster currently stands at 22 players. So you can have 23 players on a roster. There is an extra roster spot for the Kraken. And we did get to chat with Ron Francis about that. And he said, it banks some extra cap space. Good to have that flexibility there. Didn't read too much into it as far as any of that stuff. And I think if you look at the guys they sent down, Riker Evans, there's just not a spot for him to be playing on the NHL roster right now. We talked about it, right?
Mm-hmm.
There was almost nothing he could possibly do in training camp to earn a spot right off the bat if everyone was healthy. So he goes down to Coachella Valley, not a huge surprise. Shane Wright, I think that's where the team wants him to start down there. I think it's going to be good for him. We can talk a little bit more about that later, but I think it's going to be really good for him to get some games in there early. That's where they want him to start the season. And then Chris Drieger, of course, there's 3 goalies, 2 nets. Drieger ends up being the guy going down. Joey DeCourt earns the final goalie spot there. Cale Fleury, same issue as Riker Evans, right? Just crowded blue line, has to go down. And then John Hayden was the one that I thought maybe they would keep up, just given you have that extra roster spot for him. But I think Ron Francis sensed an opportunity there with waivers being so crowded on October 7th, the day that they sent them down, that probably you could sneak him through there and he wouldn't be claimed. Turns out Francis was right. And so now you have the ability to send Hayden up and down between Seattle and Coachella Valley for a while. And so you don't have to worry about that going into the season. So I think that proved to be a solid move.
Yeah. Do you think we see, like, because I also saw some people speculating, hey, you're keeping that one roster spot open in case you want to claim somebody off of waivers, right? That was an option. Obviously, the Kraken haven't done that, at least not yet. Do you think that we see Hayden called up, soon, or somebody called up soon just to have the 23-man roster? Or do you think they'll just go without another healthy scratch hanging around the team for a little while?
I think they might go without it for a little bit. And that's something that Francis touched on a little bit too, talking about that first road trip, where I don't think any of those games are back to back. So you'll always have a day in between if you do need to call somebody up. And in the meantime, you still have one surplus forward. You still have 13 forwards and you still have one surplus defenseman. So if one player were to be unavailable, you can just slot the guy in and you don't have to worry about it right away. And that way you get to continue to bank cap space. If you only have 22 on the roster, you're using fewer cap space, less cap space than if you had called somebody else up. So I think they're going to stick with the 22 for now. And of course, if there is anybody surprise comes up on waivers that's maybe worth a claim, Ron Francis will always take any opportunity he can get to make his team better. I wouldn't count on that. I don't think a waiver claim is really coming. It's not something he's necessarily looking at, but that's kind of where they're at.
Hey, you never know when the next Ellie Tolvanen's going to be, thrown out there, right?
Exactly.
And you want to be able to be able to jump on an opportunity like that. Let's go ahead and talk about Riker Evans and Shane Wright, because I think those are probably the 2 biggest names. Riker Evans, I think you even said it, right? We talked about it last week. We've been talking about it. There was no room for him. He played fantastic, though, all through his time up there, through training camp, through the preseason games. I have to imagine if when there is an injury on the blue line, Riker Evans is the call up, right? Like that is going to be who the Kraken decide to bring back up. I mean, would you Would you disagree with that first off?
I think in most cases, yes. Like I think I said last week, it depends on what kind of spot they're looking to fill. You also have a Megna who's a little bit more defensively solid and can kind of fill a different role there. And if that's the case, I think you want Evans playing AHL games. Still, you do not want him sitting in the press box. You don't want him to healthy scratch in Seattle. So I think they might still look at that. Also, I don't know if I don't think the game was in Edmonton, so I didn't get the chance to ask afterwards because, of course, I didn't travel to the game. But you watched it too. I personally thought the Evans Larson pair had a really rough first period in that Edmonton game. Got a little better as the game went on, but after watching that, I thought, okay, well, he's not ready to necessarily steal anyone's job right now.
Yeah, I did think that it was kind of like, just this little sour note towards the end of his whole experience. I just think he's so special on the power play, right? And just to break down kind of why I talked about this on the Discord with some people, but just for the larger audience here, real quick, what makes the power play look so much better with Riker Evans than say it has looked in the past for the Kraken is just his ability to move laterally at the top of the zone up near the blue line. Kind of takes a step down, creates a little bit of a shorter playing surface there, and then he just moves side to side when he has the puck. And by doing that, there's not a lot of movement on the Kraken power play. We're going to talk about this in a little bit. There's not a lot of movement there, but by Riker Evans moving side to side, it forces his wingers on the half boards to kind of adjust to that. But most importantly, it draws penalty killers away from them. When the Kraken power play stays largely stagnant, it's really easy for the PKers on the other team to just kind of stand in the set passing lanes and not have to worry about moving. You don't necessarily have to pressure also a stationary defenseman up top. That's a long shot that your goalie can see. You don't really need to worry about it, right? And so what I thought that Riker Evans did that was super, super exciting and different from what we've seen with the Kraken power play was he just moved side to side, RJ, and it really just opened everything up. And I thought that was the big thing with Riker Evans. So I do hope that maybe he imparted some of that wisdom on the Kraken power play. We'll talk about it in a little bit, but I just wanted to throw that out there about Riker Evans. Shane Wright now, RJ. I mean, there was some stuff said also about the sending down of Shane Wright to Coachella Valley. Again, it's something you and I had talked about. It probably makes the most sense for him to start the season there. Just, get some first line minutes, get more playing time than, say, playing on the fourth line with the Kraken would give him. But I also saw some interesting kind of quotes floating around from maybe Hackstall and Ron Francis about it.
That's right. So Ron Francis, we'll talk about it too, because I think Shane Wright probably would have just been playing 7-8 minutes a night on the fourth line. Yeah. And Francis said that's not what you want for a prospect like Shane Wright. I think he was pretty clear about that they'd rather have him playing big minutes in Coachella Valley. And of course, I wholeheartedly agree. And look, Shane Wright, he had a fine training camp. I think he looked a lot more comfortable. That's something that Dave Haxtell talked about, that it was a much simpler summer for him and training camp and that whole process. You didn't have the draft and the immediate aftermath of that and the media circus at training camp and everything. He was able to just go in and do the job he was there to do. And I thought he looked fine, but didn't light the world on fire. And there's nothing wrong with that. But as a result, I think it's best that he goes to Coachella Valley. And I asked Dave Haxtell, what's the message to Shane as he heads down there? And Dave said that the message is to feed off the progress that he's made. He's made progress. We see that at every level of his game, and just feed off of that progress and continue to build off of it. He also said that he had a very clear discussion with Shane about the areas of his game that they want him to focus on while he's down in Coachella Valley. He said Dan Bilesma, Jess Campbell, that whole AHL coaching staff was also, part of that communication, and that there are certain areas of his game that they really want him to focus on while he's down there, so he knows exactly what he needs to do to get that call up.
Yeah, and I just think that's super key, right? The fact that the whole organization is on the same page, that it's not just, Hackstall telling a young player, okay, here's what you can work on, but the fact that you're involving the coaching staff of where that player is going to be playing too, so that everybody's on the same page with what they want Shane working on, and the coaching staff in Coachella Valley is going to be able to put him in positions so that he can work on those things, right? That's a big important thing. You can tell somebody all day, hey, you need to work on this aspect of your game, but if they're never put in a position where they're going to be facing those obstacles, they can't learn to overcome them, right? So I think the fact that everybody in the organization is going to be on the same page around Shane is, I think, super important. And hey, look, we saw it through the preseason with him. Obviously, I wasn't at training camp to see things, but through all the preseason games that I saw from Shane Wright, what I saw was a player who is super defensively responsible, learning how to be a pretty good PKer, actually, and somebody who can show flashes of how much offensive talent he really has, especially when it comes to sneaking in net front and maybe stealing a really good shot here or there. But someone who just needs to be more aggressive. I just keep saying this about Shane Wright, especially in the offensive zone. He just needs to be aggressive as far as not chasing a play, because you don't want to be doing that, but chasing the opportunities to make a play. Right, there are times where he could come in a little heavier on a forecheck and maybe try to steal a puck, or at least bog down the other team in a corner, let's say. Or there are times where he could maybe try to not force a terrible pass, but certainly try to move the puck a little bit more, or demand the puck a little bit more, which I think was also something that was talked about a little bit from Ron Francis, I think.
Yeah. No, I think Francis mentioned a couple times too. And I remember last season too, where he was talking about even taking shifts that were maybe a little bit too short, being a little too conservative in that area. I think Francis does want to see him open it up a little bit. And it's much easier to do that when you are playing in a top 6 role and you're one of the better players on the team, like I think Shane will be in Coachella Valley, versus when you're just trying to hold down a spot at the bottom of the roster in the NHL.
Exactly. All right. So what's up next for us, RJ?
So on the flip side of those cuts, we had some great stories about a couple players making the team that we weren't sure. There were definitely competitions for those jobs, but they ended up winning them, and that is Ty Cartier and Joey Decord. So it was great talking to them the other day after it became clear that they were going to make the roster. And I'll start with Ty Cartier. I mean, he was talking about how he had the meeting earlier, right before practice, with Hackstall and with Francis, and they let him know that he made the team. And he was saying the guys were ribbing him a little bit because he just couldn't keep the smile off his face. He was trying to play it serious and play it cool, but he was just so happy with the news to find out that he made the team. And it's something that doesn't really surprise me at this point that he made the team. We were both kind of skeptical about it, I think, when he came in for the playoffs, and we figured that's great. He had a good run, but he's going to really have to earn his spot at camp this year. And but you know what? Even in the offseason, hearing the way that Dave Hackstall and Ron Francis were talking about him, it just became clear. As long as he goes in and does his thing, he's going to make the roster, and he ends up making it.
Yeah, and I think it's going to be really interesting to see the different lineup choices, because we got our first look at what we think the lines are going to be, and it's largely what you and I had been kind of predicting all along, and most people have been. So it's going to be interesting to see how they utilize Ty Cartier on the fourth line, maybe mixing him in and out of the lineup with a Kailer Yamamoto, just because we talked about this too. You can have very different looks for that fourth line depending on which of those two players you slot in, playing with Brandon Tanev and Belmar there. So I think it's going to be interesting for that. I'm also interested to see if he gets any sort of special teams time. He looks like a great penalty killer through the preseason games. I mean, unsurprising given the style of game he plays. It shouldn't surprise anybody. But I think especially if you were able to get him some PK reps with somebody like a Brandon Tanev, who I think, Ty Cartier plays a very similar style of game, or he could play a very similar style of game if he learns some of the tips and tricks that Brandon Tanev has picked up along his NHL journey. So I think that would be something that I'm very intrigued by. And then also, power play, again, foreshadowing, we will talk about the power play in a little bit. He seems like a great guy to maybe have net front, big body, strong guy, can just kind of create some chaos if you want him to. I'm kind of intrigued to see if we ever see a look like that in the future from him.
There's some possibilities there for sure. And throughout the preseason, we did see him on the power play sometimes, usually in the bumper spot. I think that's where he was, certainly by the Calder Cup finals with Coachella Valley, because I was able to watch some of those games. And that's where his spot really was. But he's been rotating in and out, was not in the final power play looks at practice today. Kailer Yamamoto was actually net front on that second unit. So maybe that's an indicator. Hey, I mean, I see the look on your face, but he's pretty good at getting lost down there along the net front. It's not the worst choice, but I could see Cartier get some power play time later this season, certainly if there's any injury issues that the Kraken have with some of those guys. So the second of the two, and this one I think I just felt the best for, because Joey Decord, I mean, it's his 5th year as a pro. As he was talking about, he said, I've been to a lot of training camps. I've gotten a lot of bad news. Just every year, he always ends up getting sent down somewhere, usually. But this year, he didn't. He made the team. He wins the backup goalie job. And he was very happy to win that job and stay up at the NHL level. And he said that after all these years, it kind of puts things in perspective. And thinking back to when he first came into the league and got some of those first games in the NHL, really without a proper training camp or anything, he said, I can't believe how unprepared I was. And looking back at it, you realize how unprepared you were for those moments. But he's finally really built that foundation. And I mean, he did everything you could possibly ask of him to earn this backup goalie job. Because I thought Chris Drieger played pretty well too, but Joey Decord left no doubt as to who should be the backup. He added a Kobe Bryant quote, about the consistency in your work effort, and we were talking with him about his some of his idols growing up sports wise. Who's the athlete you look up to the most? I thought this was interesting. He said number one has to be Tom Brady, and of course, being a Boston kid, makes sense, right? But he pointed out that Tom Brady, of course, was drafted 199th overall. He was drafted pretty late in the NFL draft. And so was Joey, actually. Joey was drafted 199th overall in the NHL draft. So he always remembers that. So I thought that was pretty cool.
Yeah, no, and I mean, all that guy did was win, so it's not the worst person to maybe idolize if you're a fellow professional athlete. I'm with you, right? Joey here in this spot, I think we all kind of saw it with his play. This is and his play last season too, right? So I don't know that there's too much that needs to be touched on there. I will just say this with both him and Ty Cartier. These are incredible NHL stories that, there's a lot of big stories going on around the NHL right now. So I understand any one story or two stories getting lost just in the shuffle of the season starting. But I do just want to take a moment to appreciate how incredible both of their two journeys to this spot in time, to them making this team out of training camp, out of the preseason, really, really is, because it's not something that you see every day, that you'll see, a player like Joey who has had to battle for so long and then finally gets there, or a player like Ty to get there either. So I just want to take a moment to hey, let's all appreciate that as Kraken fans, that we get to experience both these guys living the dream and being able to do something that not a lot of people are able to do and pull off.
Absolutely. Easy guys to root for, both of them. So those were kind of the roster bubble, players that made the team. And so the opening night roster is pretty much taken shape, and the lines are, looking like something that we recognize. You've got for the forwards, you've got McCann, Beniers, and Eberle, which we know from last season. We've got Schwartz, Wenberg, and Burakovsky. We saw that line a lot last season. We've got Tolvanen and Gord and Bjorkstrand. I mean, we know what that trio can do. It's hard to break them up ever. And then that fourth line where you've got Tanev, Belmar, and then maybe kind of that rotation there between Cartier and Yamamoto. And then on defense, I mean, Dunn, Larson, that's never going away, right?
Yeah.
Alexiak, Borgen, and then Dumoulin, Schultz. And those are kind of the D pairs that we anticipated, really. And then Jacob Megna is the extra. So Grubauer and Decord in goal, it all just kind of makes sense. No real surprises as far as anyone making the roster, I think.
No, I think this is, this was the safe money bet right before training camp started, that this is basically what we would see, and we're going to see it. And you know what? I feel pretty good about it going into the start of the season.
Yeah, I do too. Certainly after this last practice before the Vegas game, I mean, it looks solid, and everybody's healthy, which is the biggest thing.
Yep.
And I think they're ready to go. Now, the last thing I wanted to talk about with the news and notes, though, is the power play. We teased it a little bit earlier, but that's something that I found really fascinating through training camp and then through the preseason, and now looking at the power play really start to take shape for the regular season. Because as Haxtell said, tomorrow it's for real, and it sure is. So I got the chance to talk with Jordan Eberle and Dave Haxtell about the power play this morning at practice. And I was interested in some of Jordan Eberle's answers, because asked him about the power play unit and getting Berkey back and just kind of how he generally felt about it. And he gave me something interesting. He said one of the things they want to do is just try to be less stagnant and get some more player movement on the power play. And of course, Dylan, this is something the two of us have been looking forward to over the last couple years and maybe hoping the Kraken would implement. And Eberle also mentioned, though, that one of the things that allows them to do that is just having that time together and those reps together, which really not most teams generally have more experience with that. He said you look at the best power plays in the league and they're guys who've been playing together for almost 10 years sometimes, and they just have that sense of where the guys are going to be. You can make blind passes because you know where your teammate's going to be. You can move around in the zone because you know your teammate's going to cover for you, and just having that experience together allows you to incorporate more of that movement. So of course I was happy with those comments about wanting more player movement there. So I asked Dave Haxtell about it, and he did confirm that is something that they are working on. And I did kind of have to clarify, because he's like, he, as a coach, he's like, well, what do you mean? Do you mean like player movement? Do you mean like personnel moving in and out? And one of the things that I've noticed quite a bit on the top power play unit is that Jared McCann and Matty Beniers were moving around, kind of switching between each other's spots a lot. Jared McCann was actually playing in the bumper spot a lot today, but Matty Beniers was also rotating in there as well. And Jared McCann was on the right side, but you also had Andre Burakovsky kind of moving around the formation. Occasionally they would switch. So a lot more player movement than what we're used to seeing. And Haxtell, as I said, did confirm that is something they're working on, but did caution against trying to do too much or be perfect too early. He said, tomorrow's for real against Vegas. You don't want to try and do too much, but hopefully we start to see that progress a little bit more throughout the season, because the power play is an area that they need to get better at. Eberle acknowledged that, and I think that's the main way that they're trying to do it.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just so happy to just kind of hear that, like, it's acknowledged, right? Like, that for me is just huge after the 2 years of power plays that we've seen, kind of thing, right? And I'm not trying to be too down on it, but like, they've been bad. We all know that. I think that's huge. I like hearing about the player movement, about guys switching spots and all that kind of stuff. The bottom line is I totally agree with Jordan Eberle, right? It's one thing when you've been playing together for a long time. You look at even just the difference in personnel on the power play from year 1 to year 2 for the Kraken. Not a ton of those guys the same, right? You look at the additions of a Burakovsky or a Matty Beniers, Oliver Bjorkstrand, right? Like, these are big names that really shift what the power play is, or even Justin Schultz taking over quarterbacking it from the back end. So this is really going to be their first time where we're going to see the power play carry over personnel wise from from 1 year to another. And I think that is going to be significant. I think it's going to allow them to be more creative, experiment a little bit more, be a little bit more comfortable, which leads to those first two things. I think that is big. I definitely, want to emphasize how much I agree with Jordan there. But it's just one of those things of, look, if you are going to have that player movement, one of the easier ways you can have that player movement and have everybody stay on the same page before they know everybody's, intricacies to what they want to do and where they're going to, exactly be, is just have some set plays of just, hey, if the puck is here, if it goes into, say, the right side corner, we want whoever our right side half board player is to really drop down. We want our net front guy to drop behind the net to be available for a pass there to cycle it around, but also bumper roll. Hey, guess what? Come slide in more closer to net front and maybe be available for a pass there. And just let everybody know that, hey, if you are in that spot, right, if you shift over into that spot because everybody's moving around, understand that is your role. Right. And that's just an example of a play that doesn't need to actually happen. But I think if you can do that, so everybody knows, like, based on certain situations, if I'm playing in the bumper, this is what I'm supposed to do. I think you can kind of cheat some of that chemistry stuff a little bit, just because, it's planned. Everybody's on the same page still without having to have played together for nearly a decade. So I'm interested to see if we start seeing some of that kind of stuff, or maybe I'm pushing it a little too much too soon, which Haxtell was trying to warn me about there, RJ.
Yeah, I think that might have been, direct. He didn't say Dylan at the end of it, but
it was implied.
Detective picking it.
Definitely. But definitely exciting stuff there from the power play, I think. All right, and then as we transition over into the deep dive segment of the podcast, RJ, where we're going to be answering everybody's questions from that the mailbag that we did. First off, we gotta plug comedy show that we talked about a little bit last week. It's getting closer, everybody. There are tickets still available, from what I understand. So wanna talk about that.
That's right. There are tickets still available to the Hat Tricks post-game comedy show. It's at the Angry Beaver. They've got a fantastic lineup of comedians, people from Bumbershoot, Edinburgh Fringe, lots of different comedy festivals. And of course, each date has a different lineup, so you can go to multiple shows. It'll all be different. And it's for nights where the East Coast hockey games, it's only East Coast hockey games. They're over early, so you can stay, watch the East Coast hockey games, come for the comedy show afterward. It's going to be great. There are 3 dates: Monday, October 16th, Monday, October. So that one's coming up. That's less than a week
Yeah.
away. Monday, October 23rd, and then Friday, November 3rd. Starts around 8 o'clock or so, barring overtime, of course, in those Eastern Conference NHL games. Tickets are $7 each or 2 for $10. You will not get a lineup that good for that price anywhere else. Tickets are online or at the door, but it's recommended you get them online ahead of time. Make sure you secure your tickets. And of course, we'll have a ticket link for you in the podcast description.
Definitely, definitely. And, just wanted to say this was all brought to our attention from, ECH community members who are also a part of this. So just, know that you're helping out the ECH community as well by going. All right, RJ. So mailbag time. Lots of questions as we approach the beginning of the Kraken's 3rd season. And we're here to try to answer everybody's questions.
That's
Emphasis
right.
on
Lots
try.
of good. Yes, but lots of good questions too. I'm always amazed whenever we put out the mailbag,
Yeah.
just how many good questions that we get, and how much it gives us to talk about things that even we probably wouldn't have thought of or talked about otherwise. But great questions, everybody. Thank you to everyone who answered the
Definitely.
call for the mailbag.
Definitely, definitely. I mean, hey, one of the things we've always done with Emerald City Hockey is try to make it as community focused and based as possible, and involve everybody, right? Yes, you're the one there, right, with the credentialed access and everything, but we want everybody to feel as close to the team as possible, through us, whether it's talking to us in the post game lives or doing mailbags like this, just always being available on social media or on the Discord, right? And so this is just another way of doing that, and it's my favorite thing that we do, right? Communicating with the community. It's the best.
Absolutely. All right, shall we dive in, Dylan?
Yes, let us deep dive into the community mailbag here, RJ.
Yep, well done. So we'll start off. First question here from Nathan. It seems like a foregone conclusion that Vegas and Edmonton will be at the top of the Pacific Division. What must the Kraken do to give them a run for their money? What do you think, Dylan?
Well, the easiest solution would be to build a time machine, go back to probably around 2011, create the expansion team then, and end up with one of the top 2 picks in the 2015 NHL draft and have either Connor McDavid or Jack Eichel, RJ. That's the easiest answer, I feel like. But realistically, look, the Kraken are building towards what both of those two teams have, whether it's the elite top end talent of the Edmonton Oilers and McDavid, Draisaitl, Nugent Hopkins, blah blah blah. It goes on, or it's just having this really solid foundation of how a team plays. In Vegas's case, attacking through transition and really building around that core philosophy and having just a rock solid lineup, top to bottom. I think the Kraken are probably closer and more in the mold of that, given the depth that they have and the way everybody plays together. But it's just one of those things of, you're talking about 2 of the top 5-ish teams in the NHL. Like it's hard to get there for everybody. And it's one of those things where it ebbs and flows. The Kraken are still building up towards that. At some point, those teams are going to, age out and start to get a little worse. But I think the Kraken are already on the right path, just, drafting well, bringing in young players, getting them ready to go, like with what they're doing with Shane Wright and Riker Evans. And, they're slowly getting there, RJ.
I think you correctly point out it takes time to build a team like that really is a true cup contender. And the Kraken probably need, just a little bit more time, or a time machine, if you can
Yes.
find a way to procure one. But really, yeah, it takes time. And I think in the near term, what you can do to give them a run for their money, because looking at the standings last year, Vegas wins the division with 111 points.
Yeah.
Kraken down at 100, Edmonton with 109. And that is the difference of, maybe 5-6 games or so, right?
Yeah.
But the easiest way to kind of chip away at that right away is just to take points off of those teams when you face them, because they're in the division. You are going to play them multiple times. And those are the important games where you can have big swings of points like that. Every game, the standings always end up pretty close just because of the parity we see in the NHL every year. And so at the end of the year, a potential 4-point swing between winning in regulation or losing in regulation can make a big difference in the standings. And it starts tomorrow. You play against Vegas tomorrow. That's your chance to have a potential 4-point swing against them in the standings if you can get within striking distance. So really, it's playing well against those teams. I mean, we saw the Kraken lose twice to Edmonton in the preseason. It's getting to that level where you're looking a little better against some of those top teams.
Yeah, no, I think that's an excellent point you make. And hey, how do you pick up a game here or there throughout the course of a season? With movement on the power play. Just gonna throw that in.
Movement on the power. It's gonna be the answer to every question, right?
Yes. No, last time, I promise everybody. But really good question.
Right, well, I know you can tie it into this next one. Let's try and avoid it. But this one from Kraken for Life. Is there reason to be at least a little concerned about goal scoring this season? Can you give me the one-word answer, Dylan?
I think so, actually. Like, yes. Is that a one-word answer?
Yes. Yeah, I think that would be the one-word answer, yeah.
Yeah. I think there's a little bit of a reason to worry about it, just because we saw such huge leaps from year 1 to year 2 for the Kraken, that anytime you see something jump like that from one season to another, you have to question, okay, how much of that is for real? Did they maybe, were they maybe under what they should have been year 1, but maybe a little over year 2? I just think it's one of those things. The scoring is really, really hard. And yes, I have to bring up the power play. If the power play is better, they can score at the same rate, if not even better. But I think as far as what they were able to do last year, they had a fourth line that was a little more offensively focused. I think this fourth line is a little more defensively focused, a little bit more about grinding things out. I think long term that is the correct choice. I think that helps you come playoff time. But it is something where you're not going to have Daniel Sprong or Morgan Geekie on the fourth line contributing 10, 20 goals the way that you were used to from last season. So I do think that their overall goal total will probably take a little bit of a hit.
Yeah, I do agree with that. And I think we've seen some indicators of it a little bit in the preseason, especially that dress rehearsal game against Edmonton. But you are going to have players like Jared McCann who have exceptional shots. We're going to shoot higher than the percentages would indicate that maybe they should. But you look overall at the Kraken shooting percentage last season, and just on the whole, it's probably not sustainable.
Yeah.
And you're going to have to find ways to make up for that, manufacture those goals. Special teams is going to be part of that. And you may see a little bit of a bump there, but I think there's certainly reasons you could be concerned. I think any concern is legitimate, but there are ways of kind of busting out of that as well.
Yeah, and I think concern is the word probably, right? Because we just don't know. We haven't had a game yet, but we're not to the level of worry or panic. So I think concern is maybe a
that's where we are on the meter right now.
Yeah, definitely.
All right. So next question from Gary, kind of related to this. Several guys had career years last season. Expecting a few may regress. Where do you anticipate that regression to come from? Do you expect anyone to surpass their stats from last season?
Jared McCann is the name that comes to mind for me, RJ. We talked about it throughout last season, but that 19% shooting percentage, I don't know that anybody's ever been able to replicate that year to year. So I do think that we're going to see a dip in shooting from McCann. Now, that doesn't need to mean a dip in goals if he decides to become a little bit more of a volume shooter. He only had 210 shots last year to get his 40 goals. You and I have seen, RJ, guys take upwards of 300 plus shots in season. So it doesn't mean that McCann has to score less than 40 goals just because his shooting percentage goes down. But that is the one that just, like, the moment I read this question was like screaming at me, right?
Right, definitely. I mean, and you can replicate those numbers, but if you do, it's going to look different. And I think that's something
Hmm.
you have to keep in mind when you're watching the Kraken is that guys are going to have to maybe change the way that they produce a little bit. And same thing with like the fourth line that you mentioned earlier, where you're not going to have a Daniel Sprong shooting over 14% as a fourth liner, but you are going to maybe have an opportunity for a guy like Ty Cartier
Hmm.
to go in there and with his style, potentially put up even 15 goals or so if he get some opportunity there, maybe on the power play too. So it's just going to look different. You're going to have it in different ways. As for anyone expected to surpass their stats from last season, I think you're going to see a little bit more progression from Matty Beniers, as you would expect from a guy going from age 20 to 21. I think Oliver Bjorkstrand is the one that stands out to me, certainly, because he was fighting it for a little bit last season, was getting pretty unlucky, and you could see that in the shooting percentage. He figured it out at the end of last season. I expect that momentum to just carry on over into this season. But that's my clear pick for someone to exceed their numbers from last year.
I think those are two excellent choices. I mean, you could say like a Burakovsky just because you hope he's healthy all year. But
Mm-hmm.
I think those are the two guys to watch definitely. I'll just throw in on the first category just to kind of reiterate. Also similar to the Jared McCann situation, Vince Dunn. He had 14 even strength goals last year. That's pretty hard to repeat as a defenseman. But hey, guess what? He had 0 on the power play, right? If he works well with the power play, the new look power play, everybody starts moving around, he could still end up with around 14 goals. It's just that they're not going to all be 5-on-5, right? They're not, you're going to see some hopefully come from the power play. That's definitely something we would like to see anyway.
Yeah, I think that's the theme. It's possible, but it's going to look different if guys do
Exactly.
repeat those numbers.
Yep.
Next question, also from Gary. With Chris Drieger on the last year of his contract and clearing waivers, is the team able to make a trade with him being in Coachella Valley? So the short answer is yes. Ron Francis can, if he gets an offer for Chris Drieger, could trade him at any point between now and the trade deadline, and that would work just like a normal trade if he was on the Kraken roster. That's not an issue at all.
Well said, Mr. Armchair GM Stream.
Yep, that's right. Armchair GM stream's coming up. This is a good warm up for it,
Yeah.
And you can ask me about Drieger trade scenarios, and I think Tampa still needs a goalie, and
Mm-hmm.
maybe we can map some of those things out in a couple days. Next question from Lena: what are your top 3 Kraken games to watch in full this first half of the season, and why? Asking for sleep-deprived non-North Americans. Now I can see you have the EU flag in your bio there, Lena. So I'm going to assume you're in Europe. And for that reason, I've gone with some games that hopefully won't be too difficult for you sleep wise.
Yeah, I've chosen a couple too. Is it cheating, RJ, if for the first one I just say tomorrow night, the season opener against the Vegas Golden Knights?
Not cheating at all. That count. I
Yeah.
don't have it as one of my 3. So there's as long as there's no
All right.
overlap there.
Well, I was gonna say that's the first of mine. I don't know if you want to have me say all 3 of mine or if we want to alternate it all. But my first one is, look, it's opening night. They're raising their banner, and hey, what a better team to kind of see where the Kraken are at than the defending Stanley Cup champions, right? Like, I just think that's got to be must watch.
Yeah, I agree with you. I'm going to be looking at that very closely too. I think it's a good measuring stick game for the Kraken to kind of see where they're at this point, even though Dave Haxtell definitely gave me some pushback on that today. So there's no measuring stick. It's just 2 points. We're worried about ourselves, all the usual talking points. But I do think there is an element there of being a measuring stick game. And even Jordan Eberle mentioning, admitting that there is a little bit of it wanting to kind of
Yeah.
spoil the other team's parade there with them doing the banner raising. So that's a good one to watch. What are your other 2, Dylan? Let's just go 3 for you and then 3 for me.
All right, my second one actually happens a week after tomorrow, and that is their first game against Colorado after that, intense first round playoff series that we saw last year. And I promise I'm not just picking all these games in October. But I just think that one is going to be must watch just because if we're ever going to see like, non-goal scoring fireworks in a game, I think that's going to be the game because, we had the whole Cale Makar hit on Jared McCann. There was, of course, Jordan Eberle on Cogliano with that, potential boarding call that ended up breaking Cogliano's neck. And I think that Colorado is still going to be upset that they lost that series. They're going to be upset at everything that went down. I think there's still room for the Kraken to be upset about some things as well. And I just think, some stuff might go down at CPA on the 17th of this month, RJ. I think it just might, and I think it's going to be a must watch.
All right. So we were thinking in a similar way a little bit for one of my games. So I'll get to that when you're done with your third game.
All right, and then for my third game, I'm actually going to the next month, and you can pick whichever time works better for you. But whether it's November 11th or November 15th against the Oilers, I think those are going to be really good games. I think all the games against the Oilers are going to be ones worth tuning into for a lot of the reasons that we talked about a few questions ago. Which is, look, they're one of the few teams that we solidly place at the top of the division, and as you mentioned, these are your opportunities to steal points from them, to have those 4-point swing games. And I think that, they're just also a good litmus test as far as, hey, can we play well and keep up with the team using our special teams? Can we defend well against, the best player in the world? Can we score and keep up with them? So I just think a lot of the questions that we have had about the Kraken through years 1 and 2, we still have about them year 3. And I think playing the Oilers is a great time to kind of get answers to some of those questions.
Yeah, that stretch is going to be intense. And that's why my first game comes from that stretch of 4 games. November 9th, 11th, 13th, and 15th. It's at Colorado, at home against Edmonton, at home against Colorado, and then at Edmonton. So 4 games, 2 each against the Oilers and the Avs. And I went with November 13th against Colorado because that'll be their second game against Colorado in 4 days. It'll be their third game against Colorado in the very young season at that point. And I think that it might have escalated to rivalry status by that point, depending on what goes on in those previous 2 games. I think already by that point, people are going to know it's going to be must-watch TV. And of course, it takes place in Seattle. It'll be 7 p.m. So hopefully it's not too bad for you timing-wise. I tried to avoid all the East Coast start games, so these will be 3 home games that I picked. So the next game is December 9th at home against Tampa Bay. 7 o'clock start time, Pacific time. And the reason I picked this one is that the Kraken have never beat the Tampa Bay Lightning. That's been a team they've always struggled against. And the Lightning always play a strong, disciplined game. You're not going to get away with any kind of subpar effort against them. I expect that to be the same this year, even with Andrei Vasilevsky probably still out at that point, going to be missing that part of the season. But I think it's going to be a challenge for them as well, and see if they can get their first ever win against Tampa. And then the final game that I picked is, and this is probably my game where I'm like, is it cheating? But the Winter Classic against the Vegas Golden Knights. The opponent is, of course, the defending Cup champs. But I think for you, the big reason to watch it too is that it starts at noon Pacific, which should be 8 or 9 p.m. for you. Hopefully you don't have to stay up too late to watch that game. I think the timing is going to work out perfectly for you.
Yeah, I'll allow it. Not that there's actual rules about this. I stopped at the end of the year because the question was first half. But yes, the bottom line is also the Winter Classic game. It's just going to be a must watch for the celebration of Seattle hockey that we're all expecting it to be, and everything too. It's just such an important game for this franchise to have. I just think it's must watch for so many reasons. But yes, the timing definitely helps, I think.
Yeah, Kraken fan or not, I think that one's a must-watch game. And it is game number 38 out of 82, so it is in the first half of the season.
All right.
I went with the way the question was worded, so we've got that. All right, next question from AJ. What one thing will play the biggest role in the Kraken's success or failure this season? So can we pinpoint one area, Dylan, that we think is going to be most important? It's difficult. This is a tough question.
I said I wouldn't mention the power play again, but
Go ahead. It's fair game here.
The Kraken have proven that they are a deep team, that they are a team that can hang with just about everybody, and that they can be a playoff team and they can make waves in the playoffs. They did all of that despite the fact that they've had just one of the worst power plays in the NHL both years of their existence. And it's one of those that, hey, look, if other guys are going to start to regress, or if goal scoring as a whole regresses a little, that's not only where you can just make up for that, but you can even improve on last year's goal total, but do it in a more sustainable way. And so I have to say the power play, because how many games did we watch them lose last year, RJ, by a goal, or maybe 2 goals if there was an empty netter, but they went 0 for 3 on the power play. They went 0 for 4 on the power play, right? That's the one thing that if they are able to turn it around, and I'm not even saying they need to be top 5, but if they could just even get to league average, I think that adds 6 points, if not more, to just the standings for you. Like, that's
Yeah.
not insignificant. So I have to say the power play, even though I promised I wouldn't. Sorry, everybody.
It's right. And if you didn't say the power play, you know what? I would have, because I think that is such an important area for all the reasons you said. But I'm going to try and pick something else. And I'm going to go with depth scoring, and particularly that fourth line scoring, because it made such a big difference for the Kraken last season. If you look at guys like Daniel Sprong, Ryan Donato, Morgan Geekie, the production that they were able to have, combining for 40, let's see, 20, yeah, 44 goals between the
Yeah,
three of
it's
them,
a
right?
lot.
I mean, that's something you're going to have to replace somewhere. Now, whether it's guys like an Oliver Bjorkstrand we talked about earlier scoring a little bit more, or maybe the power play figuring it out. There are other ways to make that up. But I think the new look fourth line is still going to have to contribute this year. And I think that is a question mark for the Kraken. You take those goals away, you take those, especially the timely goals last season that the fourth line would provide. And I don't know, the Kraken are really on the edge of that playoff bubble. So I think it's the kind of thing they're going to have to figure out a way around.
Yeah, what, you don't think Jared McCann can just pick up that slack, RJ, and have an 84 goal season?
You know what? I mean, if we theorized, right, that his shooting percentage, we always expect it to regress, and it always goes up. So
Yep.
like, it's regressing into the clouds. If that happens, then I think we're good.
Yeah. And just a quick shout out, if a goaltender could maybe have a 900 save percentage, that could maybe do it too.
I've kind of given up on that. I'm sorry. No, because I explained this when we did the over-unders.
Yeah.
I think Kraken goalies, they can play perfectly well and do everything they need to do, and the save percentage is still going to be like 895. That's just a product of the system. I don't even really judge them for that anymore. I'm just going off the eye test, or at least goals saved above expected or something. I've kind of given up on that already.
It's fair. It's the system. It's not the goalies.
Yeah, as long as we can acknowledge that. So those are kind of our factors for this season. Next question here, and this is a little bit of a different type of question. This is from Daniel, and he's asking for kind of an explanation on icing and how icing works and why icing is there. He said, every explanation I've ever heard of about icing deals with the offensive and defensive player racing for the puck as it gets dumped into the zone. The D-man wins, icing is called, but no one's explained to me why during situations like a 6-on-5 end of the game, or everyone's at the other end of the ice, puck gets sent all the way down. There's nobody to deliver a big hit or anything to contest that puck. Why is icing still called?
Yeah, well, in that specific situation, just to, I guess, start at the end of the question, it's still important because not only does the clock stop, but also then the face-off comes all the way back. And so it's just there to keep teams from, it's there to help make the end of the game exciting, right? You have a team with a goalie pulled. You don't want the other team just to throw the puck down the ice and everybody's got to waste 20 seconds while they go chase it and then bring it all the way back down the ice. You want there to be offensive possession. You want that excitement if you're the NHL because, hey, guess what? You want your team to feel like they're in it all the way to the end. That keeps you around watching the games. That helps them sell ad space late in the game. So that's, not to get too out there with the answer, but that's why you want icing in those situations. And then I'll let you maybe take the first part of the question.
Right. And so in general, yeah, icing also just tends to slow down the game if you were just allowed to do it with impunity. So it's to discourage teams from dumping the puck all the way down and making a penalty, a disadvantage for doing so, not a penalty, but you know what I mean? And then as far as about the players racing into the puck and trying to, win those situations, the NHL did switch to hybrid icing, I was going to say a few years ago, but it's probably longer ago than that now. But it used to be where just the first player to touch the puck was the guy who kind of won the race. So if it was the defending player, icing would be called. If it was not, icing would be waved off. But that did cause a lot of injuries, guys crashing into the boards, going for that puck. And so as a result, the NHL switched to hybrid icing, where it is a race to those face-off dots. And at that point, they call the winner there, or if it's a tie, it goes to the defender going back for icing. So that's why they switched to hybrid icing, to reduce some injuries there, and that's why the rule is the way it is now.
Yeah, and the bottom line is icing just exists so that if a team goes up 1-0, they can't just dump the puck all the way down the ice endlessly, as a defensive strategy and just burn a bunch of time and make the game very unwatchable. I think that
would be no fun for anybody to watch.
That's ultimately why it's there.
That's right.
But good question.
Yep, good question, Daniel. So next question from Nicole, and I want to give you a shot at this one first, Dylan. What do we have to do to convince Hackstall to let Adam Larson be in the shootout?
I
What do you
mean,
think? I'll let Dylan give a fun answer. I'll give the serious answer. Go ahead,
I
Dylan.
was gonna say, besides, like, I just don't even know. I'm trying to think at this point, RJ. I just don't know that there's a large enough sum of money that could be offered, at least not on the Emerald City hockey budget. But
Yeah, certainly not.
yes. So I was trying to think of, like, every year when they do when the players and the coaching staff put together the charity baskets, right, that everybody
Mhm.
can auction on and everything. I was trying to think of what Hackstall kind of tends to put in there. There's always, like, a gift certificate to like a fancy steakhouse, maybe some golfing stuff. So I'm guessing it would
A
have to.
wakeboard too. He loves to go out on the
Yes,
lake.
that's true. So it would have to involve something like that. It might have to be like an all day type thing where, you wake up, you play around the golf, then you go out on the lake, and then you end with a nice dinner, right? A nice steak dinner somewhere. I'm guessing it's going to have to be along the lines there. And you know what? As you do, you shouldn't really push it or really even talk about it at all while you're doing that, but they understand that that's what you're lobbying for, right? Like, it was all set up
Okay.
with that understanding. You don't bring it up. You just have a great time golfing, right? You talk about everything but hockey. But, that's the appropriate way to lobby, in my opinion.
Okay, so you
It's
think
the
like
best way.
implied bribery is the way to
Yeah,
go about it, though. That's the
like, hey,
path.
we're just hanging out. It's like, hey, I've made this an issue in the past, right? Maybe you do this right after there was a time to have done it and it didn't happen and it didn't work, right? And so, you do something along that. But I don't think a hard sell at the end of the night over dinner or something like that, or while you're out there on the wakeboards and you're like, swapping out who's going to be on that, who's driving the boat or something. You don't just go like, hey, you know what? I think you should try Larson on the shootout. I think that's a bad way of doing it.
Yeah, so we learned that was a mistake when I think somebody in the media suggested, like, hey, would you go to Adam Larson in the shootout after he had that great breakaway move? He's like, no, no, I'm not going to do
Yeah,
that. So
exactly.
I think the serious answer is just to make a shootout go like 15 or more rounds, the point where he doesn't have an option really. Then he's only choosing the defenseman, and maybe at some point Adam Larson would come up.
So what you're saying is it might be easier to bribe the players on the Kraken and all of the players on the other team to just not score in a shootout to get it to the point where we then see Adam Larson?
Now that I think about it, I do think that would be easier actually. I
All
think
right, there we
bribing
go.
like, 40 something NHL players is probably easier than bribing Dave Haxtell.
I would agree with that. Yep.
All right. So we have that sorted, Nicole. Hopefully that's a satisfactory answer for you. Um, Next question here from Juan the Baker. How much should we be reading into Maddie not being signed long term yet? So I guess there's a couple different ways you could look at this,
Mm-hmm.
right? I've heard some people on social media saying, well, should we be worried about potentially losing Maddie at some point? That shouldn't be worried about at all. Kraken have his rights for a long time, up until age
Yeah.
27. That's not a concern at all. He loves it here. That's not an issue. But, as far as, maybe Maddie wanting to wait or maybe trying to hold out for some more money, how worried should we be about that?
If we weren't in a situation where so many teams and players were waiting on, what the news we got just a couple days ago, which was about the salary cap and what the early projections are for next year, with everybody understanding that at some point the new television rights contract was going to hit in and the cap was going to jump, but nobody knew how much. I think if we weren't in that scenario and this was all playing out the way it is, I would maybe be concerned or even worried about it. But given the whole overall situation of nobody knowing what the future of the cap was going to be, but knowing that it was going to go up, just not having any specifics, I think it makes sense for a young, star, borderline superstar player like Matty Beniers, coming off of winning Rookie of the Year, all that stuff, to not rush into a contract that might then look bad a month later if they announce what the salary cap's going to be the following year. So I think now that teams are going to they at least have like a ballpark to start working around in as far as what that cap jump is going to be. If Matty is the kind of guy that is okay with negotiating during the season, not all players are, but if he is, I think we could start seeing, them working towards a contract extension soon. Otherwise, I'm just not worried about it because I just think that was a very big variable that nobody really knew, and it makes sense, and it's just Matty, looking out for himself in the best way possible, I think, by not rushing into an extension there and kind of holding out for that number to be known.
Yeah, we talked about this on the Red Glare podcast late last week, right? About why it just makes sense for some of these players to wait on these numbers to come out.
Yeah.
It's just the smart thing to do. And so, yeah, I'm not worried about it, probably for the same reason that you are. I think eventually, of course, they'll get a deal done. I don't have any information to really, it's just kind of a vibe, right? He doesn't strike me as the kind of guy who wants to be thinking about that stuff during the season.
Yeah.
He's just very focused, very driven. So even if it does, go toward later this season or even into this next off season, I won't be particularly worried. But yeah, they'll get a deal done. I'm not concerned about it.
Yep, definitely.
All right. Now it's prospect time, Dylan. You ready? I know this is what you've been looking forward to. We had a lot of prospect based questions. And we'll start off with a couple here. One from DJ Singletone, which of course it's an honor to get a prospect question from DJ Singletone. Probably knows better than we do these prospects. But he asks, who are your top 3 most intriguing prospects? And then we'll throw this one in here from Gaby also. Excluding AHL guys, who are a few prospects you'll be especially keeping an eye on this year. And what do you want to see improvement from each of them on over the year? So right. Dylan, 3 most intriguing prospects, and I hear they may all not be in the AHL.
That's right. So I can answer both questions with the same 3 players. The first prospect that I'm most intrigued by is actually Yanni Newman, because he has made such incredible strides. The little bit that we're able to see from him, whether it was at the World Junior Championship last December or it was at depth camp earlier in the off season that just passed. But I think Yanni Newman has, we've all known that he has the scoring touch. Right, he can shoot the puck like crazy. He can handle the puck even pretty well, and then he's got the size. Right, we're talking about just a huge guy. I'm trying to see what he's listed at right now. If the page will load, 6'4", 207. So he's always had the size. The big concern has always been skating and his ability to get to the spots that he wants to be or needs to be in. And what I saw from him at the World Junior Championships last year, and what I saw from him at Dev Camp, is that he has taken leaps. Massive leaps, Yanni Newman 6'4" level leaps in his skating ability and his ability to move around, and we're seeing that with the early results that we're seeing from him in Liga, the highest professional league in Finland, where he's got 8 points through 11 games, which, for those of you who don't follow Finnish professional hockey, that's a very, very, very good point total through that amount of games for anybody, much less a young guy who is still developing and still working on something that is, as fundamental as skating. And so I'm really, really intrigued by Yanni Newman and what we might see from him in the future. Another one, I actually went forward defenseman goaltender here, RJ, which is, I think, interesting. The defenseman, care to guess, RJ?
Is it Lucas Dragicevic?
It is Lucas Dragicevic. Because, look, this is a guy who, similar to Yanni Newman, where we knew kind of what he needs to work on, is newer player to the position, but just tons and tons of potential. Unbelievable amounts of potential. And I think, really people who watch Prospect all around hockey are going to be keeping an eye on him just to see what his development looks like this year with Tri-City, as he, kind of shifts from learning things and focusing on that offense to maybe, working on things defensively, which is really where he needs to improve. But based on everything he's shown through all the transitions he's made and everything that he's had to work on, the kid is special, and he's going to be able to work on that defensive stuff. The question is just, how high that ceiling really is for him there. I think it might actually be fairly high because he has such a high hockey IQ. Once he just learns to learn what to look for defensively and while defending, I think he's going to be able to put it all together, and he's just going to be a phenomenal player. And I think this year is really going to be the year where, you at least want to see the foundations of that defending from him. And then finally, Nicholas Coco. I mean, he's I think, not debatable. He's the top Kraken goaltending prospect, and normally goaltending prospects don't excite me as much as everybody else because I just don't know as much about goaltending. It's kind of its own thing. But just the fact that this year he's going to see significant, amount of minutes in Liga, which is, arguably, RJ, the league that has produced the most, rock solid NHL goaltenders anywhere in the world. And so the fact that he's already, he's got a 201 goals against average and a 906 save percentage through 2 games there. He looks good. He's working in a goalie factory there, and I'm really intrigued to see if he can kind of take that next step. and then maybe show up to maybe next year's dev camp just looking like a guy where you really see like, wow, the Kraken have their future goaltender here.
Yeah, he's going to be an interesting one to watch. I think those are three really good picks. So for me, knowing that you were going with some, with some non-AHL guys, I think I went a little bit more Firebird heavy. I mean, I guess I'll start for Gaby's question, just somebody who's not on the Firebirds yet, and this might be a little too easy or obvious, but Edward Chalet, just seeing how he adapts to the North American game, playing for the Barrie Colts in the OHL, just seeing him make that jump from Europe to North America, I think is going to be very interesting to watch. And so I want to see what he's able to do there, and just how quickly he's able to look comfortable too, because I think it's just as guys like, as Ron Francis has pointed out, like with Shane Wright and others, it's just this whirlwind in your draft year when you're a first round draft pick. It's a very busy summer, and you don't really have time to kind of settle in. So I want to see Chalet just get settled in North America and figure some things out. But as for the three most intriguing prospects, I'll start with, you went with Coco. I'll start with another Finn, and that is Ville Ottavainen. And he's someone who stood out to me during training camp, first and foremost, just because of his size. I mean, he was towering over the other prospects. I mean, and he, he's, I don't know what his listed height and weight are, but man, he is a giant out there. And I think he's going to go play in Coachella Valley this year. And I really want to see how he adapts to the pro game in North America, because he played in Finland basically until last season. So he's going to be going to North America for the first time. And he has the size, he has the frame to really be a menace, especially defending in front of his own net. I don't think he really fully has that mean streak yet, but I think he's going to develop it. He really kind of needs to develop it, I think, because look, he's not so much of a puck mover. He's more of a defensive stay-at-home type defenseman, but he's the kind of guy who I think on a third pairing in the NHL eventually could just be hell to play against. And I want to see the start of that in his age 21 season here in Coachella Valley.
Yeah, AHL is a great place to learn some of that too, by the way, for anybody who's watched any amount of time at that level of hockey. Listed at 6'5", 216 there for you.
Yeah, that sounds about right. 6'5", 216. I mean, he just towers over some of these guys. So the second player I want to look at is Ryan Winterton. And I'm another guy who I'm really intrigued to see how he's going to adjust to the pro game. But one thing I know for sure after watching him in training camp and dev camp, the guy's ready for it. I mean, he absolutely has the talent. He should be there, and I'm intrigued to see what he can do with the Firebirds. He's someone who I could see maybe even like a Ty Cartier type rise, where he could just keep going up the depth chart because he has the size and the ability to produce. And just if he can stay healthy, that's the other thing. Just seeing how he does, for a full season healthy would be really great to see. But I think he's someone that could kind of sneakily light it up in the AHL early.
Yeah, I was going to say he was might be an answer to one of the future questions we have to answer.
Oh, okay. A little preview there. And then the third guy is Jacob Melanson. And he just stood out during the preseason, of course. He is the Kraken's future pest. If he can just get there skill-wise to be able to produce enough to where it projects at the NHL level that he can just be a passable fourth liner, right? Mm-hmm. The other side to his game, the other things that he brings are just so valuable in the way that hockey works, especially in like a playoff series type environment. He can be a pest. He can go out there and score a goal too. We've seen the junior production from him be good enough that it hints that maybe he could have some NHL potential, but the real indicator is going to be how he does in the AHL. And I think we're going to see a lot of that this year. I think he might be, of all these guys, that were maybe later round draft picks, the one who is closer to the NHL than a lot of people think, just because of the pest element that he brings.
Yeah, I mean, I'm very curious to, as I am with all prospects leaving the queue, how they translate to the next level, and especially the fact that he's going to be in the AHL. It's a league that should play into his strengths, and I'm very excited to see what that looks like.
Yeah, he's not going to shy away from that stuff at all. Next question from Hunter. Which Kraken prospect do you think is being underrated by the national media and or fans?
All of them.
Yeah, I don't think there's a whole lot of attention paid to Kraken prospects in the national media, just given that they're a relatively new West Coast team.
Yeah, I think... I think Chalet is probably a good one just because he is a first-round pick, but it's a little further down in a very loaded draft class, but even headed into the draft, I didn't feel like he was somebody who quite got the credit that he deserved just because of, where he came from. He wasn't coming from one of the more popular situations for draft prospects. It's not an easy league for fans or people to watch out there in Czechia and stuff. So I think he just was a guy who was flying under the radar the entire time. And then on top of that, he gets drafted to a West Coast team, right? Like he just really falls off the face of the planet at that point, for a lot of people. So I think Chalet might actually be the guy that I pick with, especially because I really expect him to as he gets comfortable in the OHL, really put up some good numbers. We're already seeing the early results as he has 4 assists through 4 games. So I think he's somebody who could really pop into the OHL, put up some big numbers, and everybody's going to go like, where'd this guy come from? What's going on there?
Yeah. I think that's a good answer. I mean, I don't really have a whole lot to add. I can't think of another. I mean, I think, just not a lot of attention is necessarily paid in the national media and fans to Kraken prospects. I don't know. I'm sorry. I don't really have anybody here.
I'll give you a second one if you want. And that would be Carson,
go ahead.
Carson Rykhoff. Right? Like he's someone who has a very interesting tool set out there. He's got 5 points through 5 games to start the season with the Kitchener Rangers, but you look at his ability to defend, and especially defend against a transition game, which, all the successful NHL teams have and want to use against you. And you look at him with his long reach and his ability to defend against, from coming from behind guys, which is a very difficult thing to do. And now that he's adding some more scoring to his game, I think he's another one to watch that nobody really talks about.
Okay. And I think reason I didn't mention him too is I don't know that I fully buy in yet. I probably just need to watch more of his junior tape, but like through training camp or whatever, I don't know. It didn't all kind of get put together, but I see the toolbox that he has. I see the skills there. I probably just need to watch him play a little bit more.
I was going to say, he's a second round pick from this latest draft class. He's 3 to 4 years away from that kind of stuff right?
That's a good point. That's a good point. Just, give him some time and some coaching.
Yeah, exactly.
Let's see. I mean, this one from Eric, we kind of covered. Which Coachella Valley prospect are you most interested in following this year? But I guess Dylan, you didn't name any Firebirds as your 3. So which Firebird are you looking most forward to?
It is Ryan Winterton, like for all the reasons you said, right? I mean, he is supremely skilled. He's got enough skill to play in the NHL right now. It's more so like he needs to finish developing out his body. He needs to work on the defensive side of the game. He's going to need to work on faceoffs if he wants to stay a center. It's all that other kind of stuff. But as far as like, when the puck's on your stick and you just have to go make a play, Ryan Winterton's already there. And I think we even saw some flashes of that from the limited bit of action we saw from him this year with the Kraken. So it's Ryan Winterton. Just, how high is that ceiling really going to be for him in the Firebirds? Because I could easily see, down the stretch, Shane Wright as the 1C, Ryan Winterton as 2 maybe, or at least anchoring a second line, maybe from the wing if he's not there on faceoffs yet. So Ryan Winterton has a ton of potential, arguably I would say definitely the highest ceiling of anybody on that Firebirds team outside of Shane Wright.
Okay, I was waiting for that last bit there outside of Shane Wright. And I think Winterton for me also, aside from Shane Wright, of course, just being, a big part of the future of the franchise, I think all our eyes are going to be on him. But, moving past that, I think it's probably Winterton.
Yeah.
Speaking of Firebirds, though, or players who are there for the time being, question from Kraken for Life. Am I crazy to think that someday, maybe someday soon, Riker Evans will be a star with the Kraken? What do you think about that one, Dylan?
No, I think he's going to be a really good player, and I think he'll be a star among Seattle Kraken fans. I don't know that he has the upside or the complete game to necessarily break through and be considered a star from like an NHL standpoint, where when other fan bases are looking ahead on the schedule and they see the Seattle Kraken, I still think they're going to be thinking names like Matty Beniers or a Jared McCann or Shane Wright or something. But I don't know that they're ever going to be like, oh man, we're going to really have to worry about Riker Evans, coming up and moving the puck on us or working that power play magic. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that Vince Dunn is also there, right? You think Kraken defenseman to worry about, you think Vince Dunn, and with Vince Dunn's recent contract extension, we're going to be thinking about that for a long time. And he's going to have the opportunity to have the top minutes amongst offensive defensemen. So I think for that reason, Riker Evans might not be a star for other people, but I guarantee you he'll be a star among Seattle Kraken fans.
Yeah, I think you have it right, Dylan. I think looking at how he projects, probably ceiling of like a very good top four defenseman with that offensive upside who can run a power play and who can put up some nice point numbers because of it. But yeah, I don't know that I'd go as far as like star player in the NHL.
Mm-hmm.
Next question from Seattle Kraken GM. What does the lineup look like for the first game of the 25-26 season? All four lines and 3D pairings and goalies, please and thank you.
You
So,
can't trick us, Ron Francis, trying to get us to do your work for you, build out the future roster plans. Come on now.
yeah, got to figure that one out yourself. Nice try, though.
Mm.
Although, if you do want to see me project it in detail or possibly just try and see what I can come up with, the Armchair GM chat is coming up pretty soon in just a
Mm-hmm.
couple days. So if that's something anyone wants to see, you can type it in chat and I can go and see what 25-26 might look like.
Yeah, it's the bottom line is this. That would just take a lot of time to really get into and through right now, and this podcast is already like 15 minutes longer than it's supposed to be. So, don't have the time to get to it. I will say this: I believe Matty Beniers would be on that roster. So there you go.
There you go. All right, you got one player. Um, you better be on that
I
roster.
know.
Next question from CJ. Are there any NHL records, individual or team, that you think might never be toppled? So what's one that comes to mind for you, Dylan?
Gretzky career points, all
Yeah.
time career points. That probably never happening.
Yeah, I just don't see that happening I mean, you'd have to have some pretty dramatic rule changes.
Yeah.
A lot of the single season points too, like
Yes.
212 points in a season for Wayne Gretzky. I think some of those are just never going to be toppled. Trying to think
I
what
was gonna
other
say
ones.
to go away from the obvious stuff like the 80s scoring era ones.
Yeah.
I'm gonna say this, like the penalty minute stuff. Just because fighting is not nearly as big a part of the game now, which is certainly how you rack up those penalty minutes. Guys, things are very different, right? You go out there and you lay out a big hit to defend somebody, and you get a game misconduct and 15 or 10 penalty minutes thrown onto your record for the night. That doesn't help win you a roster spot anymore. That hurts you. You don't stay in the NHL long if you're doing that too much. You know what I mean? So I think any of the records built around penalty minutes are also just untouchable because teams are too focused on not taking penalties, not being punished, not giving other teams power plays. Nobody wants to fight anymore for a lot of good reasons. And so I think anything penalty minutes related, you're not going to see that touched ever again, probably.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. The other one I would add, and maybe it's less secure than that, would be goalies, like games played and wins records
Yeah.
and everything too. Because teams are smartening up and realizing that just playing 70, 75 games as goalies used to do is very bad for the human body, especially with the butterfly, which the human body is just not meant to do. And so you're seeing more goalie tandems, guys opting to rest their goalies or share the net a little bit more. So I think some of those big wins and games played numbers you're not going to see matched again.
Definitely, but good question.
Yep. Question here from Sasquatch. So we know that guy. He said, how does it feel to be the undisputed 2 times defending champion among notable Kraken podcast groups? I swear we did not plant this question. Sasquatch did tweet this at us.
Yes.
So Dylan, how does it feel?
I'm gonna, obviously it feels good and all that kind of stuff, but ultimately it just feels right, like that. It's just everything's just the way it's supposed to be. Yeah.
Yeah, that feeling where you are where you belong. I think that's how it feels. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
All right. Moving on. Next question from Becca. Where did the team dog Davy Jones go? So that's a good question. Something that some fans were definitely wondering, and I'm not going to fully answer it here myself because there was a great article written about that just like about a month ago or so by Kate Shefty in the Seattle Times, where she talks about where Davy Jones is now, why he's kind of taken a bit of a step back from the Kraken duties and everything. So I would absolutely recommend you go read that article from Kate in the Seattle Times because it's good stuff.
Yep, definitely. As I look down at the sleeping Emerald City hockey team dog here.
How's Afra doing?
She is totally passed out. Yeah, she crashed hard.
Mondays, right?
Yep.
So speaking of Kate and speaking of dogs, I guess. So we had a last minute question submission. This is the last question that we have. This one from Kate Shefty of the Seattle Times, very much a friend of ECH.
Mm-hmm.
So this comes from a quote today where we were talking to Dave Hackstall, and he said that the third line of Tolvin and Gordon Bjorkstrand fights like cats and dogs sometimes, like they're brothers, but it works for them. So the question is, Hackstall said the third line fights like cats and dogs. Who is a cat? Who is a dog? Please describe said cats and dogs. So let's map this one out. What are we thinking here, Dylan?
Well, you and I talked a little bit about this beforehand, and we both agreed that Ellie Tolvanen is a cat and Yanni Gord's a dog. We at least got that far and are in total agreement there. So do we want to go in depth into those two first, and then we'll tackle Bjorkstrand, or should we try to tackle?
Let's do that.
Okay. So why don't you start with Tolvanen? I don't know too much about cats. Never had a cat. Always been more of a dog guy. What kind of cat would Ellie Tolvanen be, RJ?
Well, starting off, we know he'd be a rescue cat.
Yes,
saved him from shipped him over here from Nashville and rescued him, so we know that's for sure. I think I think of the fluffy Siberian cat, like white Siberian cat, maybe a little bit, because I was tempted to go with maybe like a Lynx Point Siamese or something that I have some experience with recently, but I think they're a little too chatty, a little bit too talkative, so I think any Siamese cat is out.
Yours certainly is.
Yeah, exactly. So I guess like maybe a Siberian cat. I don't know. That's maybe, well, no, definitely not a Burmese is way too chatty. We have some experience with that one. But yeah, I'd have to think on that a little bit further, but okay. That's kind of what I came up with initially.
All right. Well, for Yanni Gord, as someone who has a ton of experience with lots of different dog breeds and seeing them in interesting situations, having worked at a luxury pet hotel and day spa, having been in camp with upwards of 100 dogs before, I've been able to see lots of different breeds and how they interact with each other and all that kind of stuff. And the bottom line is Yanni Gord is a boxer. All right, there's no question about this. I love boxers, but they are very unique and interesting dogs. They are the first dog, if something starts going down, to jump in there and to try to be at the center of it, right? Just like Yanni Gord is whenever there's some sort of tussle or net front something going on. Yanni Gord is the first one in there to try to deal with things. But outside of that, which tends to be more of their reputation, incredible family dogs. Like the best family dogs, to the point where they warn you if you do have a young family, understand that this dog is going to view like everything as a threat kind of thing. But just incredible family dogs. They're fantastic with kids. And that's, another big thing that I think about with Yanni Gord is just him and his family and what a big part of his journey and experience and day to day his family are. They're always around, right? His girls and stuff. So I think Yanni Gord, a boxer for both when the things are going down, they want to be in the thick of it. And then also just the family aspect. So Yanni Gord, boxer, that's what it is.
That's a good pick. And you know what? I defer to you, of course, on all things dogs. You have way more experience with dogs than I do. But I do think Oliver Bjorkstrand, as we get to the third member of that line, I do think he is a dog. Mm-hmm. And I have a suggestion here. So tell me if I'm way off base. I defer to you completely. But I think he's a golden retriever.
Interesting.
And the reason I think that is because in my experience with golden retrievers, they are the most kind, nice, chill, laid back dogs you're going to see, just happy and good with everyone, just loving life. And, not overly energetic or whatever, but just I don't know, just the most chill, great dog. Like if I had to get a dog, it'd be a golden retriever, I think. And that's the way Oliver Bjorkstrand is. Always happy to talk to us with the media, whether he's busy or not, he'll always make the time. Just very nice, kind guy. And then of course, I don't know a lot about the breeding or whatever, but I imagine as a retriever, you go and you go retrieve things, right? And Oliver Bjorkstrand, he's good at getting in those corners. He's good at getting loose pucks and kind of retrieving pucks. And that's what he does a lot on that line too, is he'll be the guy who goes in and goes and retrieves a puck, right?
Yeah.
So I think that's why I think he's a golden retriever. But again, tell me if I'm way off base here, because I admit I don't know a whole lot about this.
Well, no, we're in an interesting spot because you know him from a personality standpoint, where I had to base everything based off of how he plays the sport of hockey, right? Because
Right.
I'm not around to experience that day to day. I think the golden retriever thing is interesting. I think certainly like an older golden retriever, I would agree with all that kind of stuff, and they are very chill and they're just happy to be around and happy to be around, people and all that stuff. I think a puppy is the opposite of that, where they're just one of the most hyper things you could ever imagine.
Okay.
All over the place. With him, I agree he's a dog, and based on just his play with, while playing the sport of hockey, I immediately went to working breeds. And as I was looking down the list, I, thought maybe like a Great Pyrenees, but that's more of like an enforcer protector kind of guy. And I settled on a pinscher, specifically a German pinscher, because they're really smart dogs. But they do things sometimes a little bit differently. They kind of march to the beat of their own drummer, but they're still very loyal. They listen. They can fit a system, RJ, right? When they're out there hunting, they fit the system, but they're going to do it a little bit differently than maybe some other hunting dogs. And so I kind of went down that route, because that's what I think of with Oliver Bjorkstrand, is that he can play within a very structured offense, but at the same time, he'll throw in, the fact that he wants to play east-west instead of north-south, but he's going to make it work, right? And the end goal result is the same, but he's going to get there kind of in his own unique way. And so that's kind of where I went with my pick there.
I can't argue with that. No, that's a good pick. I mean, I defer to you on all things dog there, but I'm excited to see what everyone else thinks too, because this is the kind of question that I think the community can have a lot of fun with. So please let us know in the comments, reach out to us on social media, what you think. I mean, are Tolvin and Gordon Bjorkstrand cats or dogs? What type, if of cat or dog are they? I'm sure on the Discord we'll see some lively discussion there. Yes. We even have a Discord channel that's just pets of ECH. So if you want to post pictures of your own pet, around some Kraken gear or anything like that, post that on the Discord. But I think we could have some fun conversation there, expanding even to the whole roster if everyone wants to chat about that, what kind of cat or dog everyone is.
Exactly. No, that's going to be the perfect place for it. Thank you everybody who submitted questions to the mailbag. That was fantastic. We'll do a quick wrap up here because this podcast is so long. Another huge shout out to Queen Anne Beer Hall for sponsoring the podcast. As always, we really appreciate it. And everybody, have fun tomorrow. It's hockey. It is back. Kraken taking on the Golden Knights. It's going to be epic. Cannot wait. And we will see you all for post-game live afterwards. Take care, everybody.
Hey everyone, before we go, we just wanted to give a quick shout out to all of our awesome patrons over at patreon.com/Emerald City Hockey, especially our Terror of the Deep patrons. Absurdly Sane, Alex, Andrew, Anonymous, Beef, Ben, Brad, Brian, Burnt Creme, Kaylin, Chris, Cody, Connor, Coop, Daryl, DJ Singletone, Duthin, Eli, Elizabeth, Evan, Gaby, Gary, Gregory, Harry Legionary, Habak, Jay, Jane, Jeremy, Joni, Joseph, Josh, Joshua, Katie, Keegan,
Kepler, Kitty B. Kraken, Leanne, Light, Lonnie, Mark, Maya, Michael, Michelle, Noah, Nunya, Paige, Paul, Rayanne, Rebecca, Ryan, Sarah, Scott, Sia Kraken, Sean B, Sean O, Sergey, Sergeant Pickles, Shannon, Shoeshine, Skeletal Tendency, Steve, Steven, Striatic, Tasty Kobold, Ty, Tyler, Wendy, Strife, and Zame. Thank you so much for making all this possible. We really appreciate your support.